The night began like any other. Across the world, people went about their lives, unaware that history was about to change forever. The sky over New York glowed with the orange haze of streetlights, while in Tokyo, neon signs lit up crowded streets. Somewhere in the desert, a truck driver hummed along to the radio. Somewhere else, a child looked through a telescope at the familiar stars. Then, without warning, every light on Earth flickered. For 1 second, it was nothing more than a strange pulse. Then the second became 3, 4, and the pulse became darkness. Entire cities went black in an instant. Skyscrapers that had shone like beacons now stood as dead silhouettes against the night. The hum of traffic fell silent. At first, people thought it was just a power outage. It had happened before, but then the phones died. The screens of laptops and tablets went blank. The comforting chatter of television cut off mid-sentence. There was no signal anywhere. In the silence that followed, an unearthly hum began to fill the air. It wasn't coming from the ground. It came from above. People stepped out into the streets, looking up in confusion. The stars were gone. A slow, glowing shadow spread across the night sky, blocking out the constellations. At first, it seemed like a cloud, but it was too sharp, too deliberate. The shadow resolved into shapes, dozens, maybe hundreds, of enormous silhouettes hovering miles above. They did not move like planes. They did not blink like satellites. They were perfectly still, like predators waiting to strike. Someone screamed. The scream spread like a chain reaction. Newsrooms scrambled to report, but even the backup systems had gone dead. In a few places, old emergency radios sputtered too. Life, catching faint, distorted broadcasts. Nobody knew where the vessels had come from. In Washington, D.C., deep inside a fortified control room, the President of the United States stared at a grainy, green-tinted feed from one of the last military satellites still operating. The shapes. In orbit were not human ships. Their design was all wrong. Vast disks and crescent-like forms covered in pulsing veins of light. There was no visible propulsion. No wings, no engines. "Are we under attack?" the President asked quietly. A general shook his head, though he looked far from sure. No shots fired. Yet they're just watching. But in every major city, something more was happening. Small, sleek shapes detached from the massive vessels, drifting silently downward. They weren't planes, and they weren't drones. They were too smooth, too alien. They descended until they hung over city centers, each one about the size of a bus, suspended in the air as if gravity meant nothing to them, in Times Square. One of the floating shapes tilted, and a thin beam of blue light spread downward. The light didn't burn or destroy, it scanned. People caught in it froze as the beam passed over them, leaving no mark, yet making their skin crawl with an unnatural cold. In London, a similar craft hovered over the Thames. A man threw a rock at it. The rock stopped in midair, suspended for a second before crumbling into dust. The hum grew louder then. Without warning, every craft spoke at once. It wasn't a sound in the air. It was a sound in the mind. A voice deep and emotionless pushed its way into the thoughts of every man, woman, and child on earth. You have been observed. You have been found wanting. Prepare for instruction. The voice was not in any human language, yet everyone understood it. The meaning was clear and cold, stripped of any human warmth. In the control room, a wave of panic swept over the gathered officials. The feed from the satellite shifted, showing that the larger ships in orbit had begun to move. Slowly, methodically, they rearranged themselves into a perfect ring around the planet. The President turned to the general. "We need to respond." "With what?" the general asked bitterly. "Can't touch them. And if we do, we don't know what happens next." Somewhere in Moscow, a different meeting was taking place underground. Russian military officers barked orders, preparing missile systems. The missiles never launched. Each silo door froze in place, held shut by an invisible force. The crews inside reported that the metal itself had hardened, as if fused into stone. In Beijing, scientists watched their instruments fail one by one. Magnetic compasses spun wildly. Clocks lost all sense of time. In Sydney, A fisherman out on the water saw one of the alien craft up close. It passed over his boat without sound. He swore later that he saw symbols running along its surface, symbols that seemed to shift whenever he blinked above the planet. In the darkness beyond the reach of human sight, the alien fleet exchanged silent signals. Their movements were precise, almost ritualistic. This was not a random visit. It was a coordinated arrival. On the ground, the voice spoke again. Your planet has been designated for integration. You will comply. Failure to comply will result in removal. And just like that, the voice was gone. Panic erupted. People tried to call loved ones only to remember the phones were still dead. In some cities, crowds surged into the streets, pushing against one another in blind fear. In others, people simply froze, staring at the sky as if hoping it would all vanish if they just waited long enough. Then in a small, dimly lit apartment in Nairobi, a man named David Mbeki sat perfectly still. He wasn't just afraid, he was listening. Unlike the others, he'd heard something extra in the voice. A faint echo buried deep in the message. It wasn't just speaking to the world, it was speaking to someone specific to him. The message was short, almost hidden. We know you. David's hands trembled. No one knew about the files locked away in his old laptop. The ones that described strange signals he'd intercepted years ago while working for a private satellite company. Back then, he had thought they were random noise. He knew they were warnings. Far away, in a bunker beneath the Arctic ice, a single light flickered on. The room had been sealed for decades, its air stale and cold. But the system still worked. A voice, human this time, came through an ancient intercom. Defender protocol activated. Stand by. Outside, the hum of the alien fleet continued. The ships had not moved closer. Not yet, but they did not need to. Everyone on Earth knew they could. And as the world stared up at the silent giants in the sky, the first seeds of resistance and fear began to grow. The day the sky opened had begun, and it would not close again. The world had barely begun to breathe. Again, after the first night when the aliens spoke a second time, it was not in the sky, not through radios or screens, but directly into the minds of every human being on the planet. This time there were no cryptic introductions. You will submit. The voice rolled like thunder through thought itself, cold and absolute. People stumbled in the streets as the words hit them, clutching their heads, unable to block it out. It was the same voice as before, calm, mechanical, without a shred of human emotion. Above every major city, smaller ships that had hovered silently since last night shifted. They rotated in perfect unison, tilting downward, as if focusing. On the ground below, from their undersides, beams of light stabbed downward, forming shimmering walls in the air. They weren't solid, not yet, but anyone who stepped too close felt their skin crawl and their muscles lock, as though invisible hands were holding them in place. In New York, the shimmering walls sealed Times Square. In Paris, it encircled the Eiffel Tower. In Nairobi, it split the city in half. These were not random placements. They were precise and deliberate. Marking zones the aliens wanted. The voice returned. You will assemble in designated zones. You will receive further instructions. You have 24 hours. Failure to comply will be interpreted as rejection. Rejection will not be tolerated. The message ended, but the silence that followed was worse. People whispered to each other in fear, looking up at the unmoving crafts. In Washington, D.C., deep in the secure underground situation room, the president stared at the countdown timer now glowing red on the main wall. A general stood beside him, his jaw tight. They're forcing us into collection areas, the general said. It's not just here, it's happening everywhere. Do we have any way to communicate with them? The president asked. The general hesitated. We've tried every radio frequency, every transmission format. Nothing. It's like they're ignoring us, but they already know everything we're going to say. On the other side of the planet, in Beijing, the Chinese leadership faced the same clock. Scientists studied the shimmering barriers but couldn't make sense of them. They weren't made of any known energy field. Whatever it was, it reacted to living bodies but not to inanimate objects. Rocks thrown through it passed unharmed. People who tried to walk through froze, their muscles locked until they were dragged away. In London, the Prime Minister demanded answers from his advisors, but they had none. One of them suggested moving people into the zones to avoid provoking the aliens. Another said they should resist. The arguments were loud, and none of them felt like they mattered. The countdown kept ticking, far beneath the Arctic ice. In the secret base known only to a handful of people on Earth, the Sci-Fi Defenders were fully awake. For decades, they had been preparing for something like this. Their leader, Commander Yara Kane, stood over a holographic map of the world, watching as alien control zones spread like a disease. "They're not here for negotiation," she said to her second-in-command. "This is pre-invasion conditioning. They break the population's will before they even land troops. We can hit the smaller ships," her second-in-command offered. "Maybe capture one." Kane shook her head. "Not yet. They're waiting for us to make the first move. And when we do, they'll hit back hard. We need to know exactly what they're capable of before we act." Still, she couldn't ignore the fact that the aliens had given a deadline, and humanity had never been good at waiting quietly. By hour 12, panic had spread in some cities, while others had fallen into eerie silence. People began moving toward the zones, unsure if they were saving themselves or walking into a trap. Alien drones floated above the crowds, their black, glassy surfaces reflecting terrified faces in Moscow. A group of soldiers decided not to wait for orders. Using a modified missile launcher, they targeted one of the hovering crafts. The projectile hit dead center and dissolved into dust before touching the surface. A moment later, the craft emitted a short pulse of light. Every electronic device within a kilometer went dead. Cars stopped in the streets. Guns jammed. Watches froze. The soldiers fell to the ground, clutching their heads in agony. None of them moved again. The footage spread quickly through underground channels, filmed on old analog cameras that the aliens couldn't disable. It sent a message more terrifying than the aliens' own words. They could kill without firing a single shot. As the final hours ticked down, David Mbeki, the man in Nairobi, who had heard the hidden message, sat alone in his apartment. He hadn't gone to the zone. He hadn't told anyone what he'd heard. But the words "we know you" replayed in his mind like a warning and a threat at the same time. Outside his window, the alien craft still hovered. Its smooth black surface reflected the city lights, though they seemed dimmer now. Then, without sound, it rotated slightly until it was facing directly toward his building. And David knew they weren't just looking for humanity. They were looking for him. The clock hit 0. The sky began to change. The moment the countdown reached 0, the sky lit up like dawn had come too early. But it wasn't sunlight. It was alien light, cold, pale, and unnatural. The massive ships in orbit shifted, their glowing veins of blue and white pulsing in rhythm. The smaller craft hovering over the cities tilted downward, their undersides opening like the petals of a steel flower. From each one, streams of liquid silver poured out, hanging in the air like shimmering mist. Then the mist began to fall, not as rain, but as threads, weaving themselves into strange, geometric shapes above the ground in every designated zone. These shapes solidified into towering spires, black as obsidian and perfectly smooth. They had no windows, no doors, but something about them made the air feel heavy. As though the sky itself was pressing down, the voice returned. "Integration begins now." The words cut straight into the minds of every human again, but this time there was an edge, a finality that made stomachs tighten. In the Arctic, Commander Yara Kane stood in the Defenders' command room, watching satellite feeds stream in. Her operators tracked hundreds of these black spires appearing across the planet. "They're building something," one tech said, his voice trembling. "They've been building for years," Kane replied, her eyes locked on the feeds. "We just never saw it until now." One of the operators looked at her. "Commander, how could they have been building here without us knowing?" Kane didn't answer right away. She thought back to decades of strange reports, unexplained signal spikes in the deep ocean, missing satellites, ancient structures, and remote places that governments covered up. It all made sense now. They've been here before, she said. At last, they've been preparing this for a long time. Meanwhile, in Nairobi, David Mbeki still hadn't moved from his apartment. The alien craft outside hadn't left. In fact, it hovered lower now, its reflection stretching across his window like a dark tide. Then it spoke. Not to the whole world, to him alone. You have something that belongs to us. David's chest tightened. He knew exactly what they meant. The encrypted files hidden on an old offline laptop in his closet, recordings of a strange signal he'd intercepted 6 years ago while working for a satellite relay company. Back then, he thought it was just cosmic background noise. But now, he recognized the pattern. It was their language. How do you even know who I am? He whispered, even though there was no point. They could hear his thoughts if they wanted. Voice didn't answer his question. Instead, it gave an order. Bring it to the spire. Now, David's hand shook. If he went, he didn't think he'd come back. If he didn't, he doubted the building he lived in would survive the night. Half a world away. In an underground hangar below the Arctic ice, Kane gave her own order. Activate Sentinel Team. I want eyes on one of those spires before the day is out. An hour. Later, a black aircraft, designed to be invisible to both radar and heat scans, cut across the dark polar sky. Inside, for members of the Defenders Elite Recon Squad prepared to land near a spire in Greenland. The landing was quiet, but the spire wasn't. It pulsed with a low vibration, like the heartbeat of something massive and alive. Corporal. Leanne stepped forward first, scanning the surface with a handheld device. It's not solid metal, she reported. It's something else, organic and synthetic at the same time. Before Kane could respond through the cum, a ripple spread. Across the spire's surface, a section of the black material seemed to liquefy, folding inward like a mouth opening. The team froze. A shape stepped out. It wasn't human. It wasn't even close. It stood tall and thin, its limbs too long, its skin a metallic gray that shifted. With the light, its face had no mouth, only a smooth surface, broken by 2 narrow slits where eyes should be, slits that glowed faint blue. It looked at the humans for a long moment. Then, without moving its mouth, it spoke in perfect English. You were not meant to resist. Corporal Leon raised her weapon instinctively, but before she could fire, the alien raised a single hand. Every weapon in the squad's grip locked. Up instantly. The trigger mechanisms fused in place, as if welded shut. The alien tilted its head, almost curious. Your technology is crude, but your minds are dangerous. And then, before anyone could react, it dissolved into a mist and vanished back into the spire. The black surface sealed shut behind it. Back in the command room, Kane heard every word through the squad's audio feed. She clenched her fists. I think the aliens were not just here to take Earth. They were here because of something specific, something about humans they saw as dangerous. And somewhere in Nairobi, man named David Mbeki was holding the one piece of information that might explain why. The order came just before dawn. Commander Yara Kane stood in the center of the Defenders' command room, backed her hands behind her back, eyes fixed on the holographic globe in front of her. All across the planet, alien spires pulsed with an eerie rhythm, as if breathing. Above them, the great ships remained locked in orbit, their presence a silent reminder of who held the power. For 2 days, humanity had done nothing but watch. The aliens had spoken twice, issued demands, and met the world's silence with patience. That felt more like a threat. Now, Kane had decided it was time to break that silence. Today, she told her team, we show them we are not prey. The room was silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Everyone knew what she meant. Once the Defenders struck, there would be no going back. The target was a medium-sized craft that had been hovering over the Canadian wilderness. Far from civilian populations, intelligence suggested it was a patrol vessel, isolated from the main fleet, but still tethered to the alien network. If they could capture it, or even disable it, they might learn something about its weaknesses. Sentinel Team was assigned. The mission: For operators in black, adaptive armor, loaded into a stealth dropship, engines whispering as it lifted from the ice hangar. Kane's voice came through their earpieces. "Do not destroy the craft. You are there to take it. Get in, get out." Live to fight again, they crossed the tree line under the cover of clouds. The alien vessel floated 30 meters above a frozen lake, its smooth black surface reflecting the moonlight like glass. No visible weapons, no openings, just hovered, unmoving as if waiting. The dropship's side hatch slid open, and ropes unfurled into the cold night. The team descended in silence, boots crunching on the ice. Corporal Leon activated a device. On her wrist, blue ripples spread outward, disrupting the craft's energy field. Just enough for them to approach without being frozen in place like the civilians had been. "Window is 90 seconds, she said. "We breach now." Specialist Grant launched a grappling spike into the underside of the craft. The spike melted into the alien metal, forming an anchor point. One by one, the team ascended the cable, pressing their gloved hands to the cold, impossibly smooth surface. It didn't feel like metal. It felt alive. Grant pulled out a plasma cutter, human tech, but one of the Defenders' best. He pressed it against the hull. For 2 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then the surface began to soften, curling back like heated plastic. A gap formed, revealing a dimly lit corridor inside. The team slipped in. The interior was like nothing they'd seen before. Shifting walls that pulsed faintly, floors that hummed beneath their boots. There were no visible controls, no screens, no seats. It was as if the ship itself was a single, living organism. "Commander, you seeing this?" Leanne whispered into her mic. "Copy," Kane replied. "Get to the core." They moved deeper into the vessel, weapons raised. Then, without warning, the corridor walls rippled. From the shadows, figures emerged. Not drones, not soldiers, but something in between. They stood on 2 legs, their skin the same metallic black as the ship's walls. Their eyes glowed faint blue, and when they moved it was silent, unnatural. "Contact," Grant hissed. The creatures didn't attack immediately. They simply stepped forward in unison, tilting their heads in a disturbingly human gesture, as if studying the intruders. "Back," Leon ordered, but it was too late. The creatures lunged. The fight was fast and brutal. Human rounds barely slowed them, and struck their bodies folded in unnatural ways. Bones if they had any bending where they shouldn't, but the Defenders were trained for this. They moved as one, targeting the glowing slits where the creature's eyes should be. One fell, its body melting into the floor like liquid metal. The others retreated just as suddenly as they'd appeared. "This ship is defending itself," Leanne realized. These things are the ship. They pressed forward, following a faint hum to the vessel's center. There, they found it. A glowing sphere suspended in midair, veins of light pulsing across its surface. Data streamed across the Defenders' HUDs as their scanners tried to interpret it. Grant reached for it. "This is the core. It's the moment." His fingers touched the surface. The entire ship screamed. Not with sound, but with vibration so deep it rattled their bones. Outside, the vessel shifted violently, tilting in the air. The ice on the lake cracked and groaned. "Get it loose." Leanne barked. Grant pulled. The sphere resisted, then tore free with a burst of light that knocked the team off their feet. Immediately, the ship's glow dimmed. Its humming stopped. They had done it. "Package secured," Leanne reported. Returning to dropship, they scrambled back through the hull breach, rappelling down to the frozen lake just as the alien vessel began to sink, its once perfect shape collapsing into black sludge. By the time they were airborne again, the craft was gone, melted into nothing. In the Defender's Arctic base, Kane watched the feed and allowed herself the smallest nod. "First blood," she said quietly, but in orbit, aboard one of the massive capital ships, a being unlike the ones on Earth, stood before a vast viewing window. Its eyes glowed, not blue, but gold. It had seen the human strike, and it smiled not in amusement, but in recognition. "So, It murmured in a language no human could speak. They have teeth. And far below in Nairobi, David Mbeki felt the echo of that voice in his mind. It wasn't directed at him, but it was close enough to make him realize the truth. The aliens were no longer simply observing. They were hunting. Word of the strike spread faster than the defenders had planned. They'd meant to keep it quiet, a surgical mission, a stolen core, a quiet victory to study in secret. But nothing about the aliens seemed to stay hidden for long. It started as a flicker in the night sky. In cities across the planet, people looked up to see alien ships shift slightly in orbit, their glowing vanes dimming for a few seconds before returning to full brightness. It was subtle, but the change was noticed and recorded. In Johannesburg, a man with an old analog telescope caught it on film. In Mumbai, an engineer watching from his rooftop noticed the pulse in the ship's lights matched the rhythm of emergency signals used by Earth's satellites. Within hours, whispers began in underground networks. Someone hit them. The aliens responded in a way no one expected. On the second morning after the raid, every sky above every major city turned a soft, unnatural silver. In that strange light, a vast image formed, projected as if the clouds themselves were a screen. It wasn't an alien broadcast. It was human footage, grainy, shaky, but unmistakable. Sentinel team, repelling from their dropship. The breach. Into the alien hull. The fight inside. The glowing sphere ripped free from the ship's core. They'd been watched, and now the whole galaxy was watching too. The voice came, louder than ever, not just in human minds, but carried on invisible waves. That traveled far beyond Earth, somewhere in the darkness between stars. Countless other beings could hear it. This world resists. The statement hung in the air like a challenge, in places no human had ever seen. Other alien species turned their attention toward the small blue planet. Some watched with curiosity, others with fear, a few with something darker. In the Arctic, Base Kane stood frozen as the transmission played out. "They're broadcasting us," she muttered. "Why?" Her second in command, Malik, frowned. "To make an example, to show everyone how they deal with rebels." But deep down, Kane wasn't so sure. There had been a tone in that last sentence, not anger, not threat, but interest. Meanwhile, in a floating city on a gas giant hundreds of light years away, a council of beings cloaked in mist debated quietly. Humans, one said, primitive, chaotic, violent. And yet another replied, they took a Vorthon patrol ship. That has not happened in centuries. Back on Earth, the reaction was immediate. In crowded cafes, in abandoned warehouses, in bunkers beneath cities, whispers of hope began to grow. For the first time, humanity had struck back and survived. In Nairobi, David Mbeki watched the broadcast in his apartment. He recognized the ship in the footage. It was similar to the one that had hovered outside his window. And he knew the aliens wouldn't let the theft of that core go unanswered. The voice came again, softer now, but aimed only at him. "We are coming." He stood quickly, heart pounding. He didn't need to ask who we meant. In orbit, the alien fleet began to shift again, vessels moving into new positions. This time, they weren't just watching, were forming something. From the largest ship, a new structure emerged, vast, ring-shaped, and glowing with gold light. It began to spin, energy gathering at its center. In the Defender's command room, Kane's analyst stared in disbelief. "Commander, whatever that is, it's not a weapon. It's a transmitter. A big one." "Transmitting what?" Malik asked. The analyst swallowed hard. An invitation. Kane's gaze hardened. If the aliens were calling others to witness Earth, then the next phase was coming fast. And it wouldn't just be the Vorthons they had to fight. And somewhere in the depths of space, ships began to answer that call. They came quietly. No thunder of engines, no blinding lights. One moment, the sky above Earth was filled only with the massive, patient shapes of the Vorthon fleet. The next, there were new shadows among them. Vessels of strange design, each more alien than the last. Some looked like great curling shells. Others were thin and spined, like the bones of colossal creatures. One was nothing but a shifting cloud of silver particles, holding formation as though it had a will of its own. The Vorthons didn't fire. They didn't even shift to defensive positions. These weren't enemies. They were invited. From the Arctic base, Kane watched the ships appear on the holographic map one by one. The Defender's sensors struggled to lock onto them. Several didn't seem to exist, according to normal physics. "They're answering the call," Malik said quietly. "And we have no idea who they are." Kane didn't reply. Her eyes stayed on the feed. She could feel it in her gut. This was no casual meeting. The Vorthons wanted an audience for whatever they were about to do next. In Nairobi, David and Becky's apartment was dark, curtains drawn. The laptop with the alien files sat on the table in front of him. He hadn't touched it in hours, not since the second message. "We are coming." He thought about running, but where could he go? The ships were everywhere, and if they truly knew who he was, they could find him in a crowd of millions. The building shook. David froze. It wasn't a normal tremor. It was too short, too sharp. Low hum followed, vibrating through the walls. Slowly, he moved to the window and peered out through the narrow gap in the curtains. The craft that had been watching his neighborhood was gone. In its place, far above the city, a long, needle-shaped vessel hovered. Its hull shimmered with faint red lines, and unlike the Vorthon ships, it moved constantly, shifting, weaving, adjusting its angle like a predator circling prey. David's phone, long dead since the blackout, flickered once, then lit up with a single message. It wasn't from a number he recognized. It was just one word: run. At the Arctic base, the Defenders were dealing with a problem of their own. The spire in Greenland the one Sentinel team had scouted had begun to glow brighter as, if reacting to the arrival of the new ships, Kane ordered a recon drone to investigate. The drone's camera feed was crystal clear as it approached. The spire's surface was shifting, black turning to silver, silver to deep crimson. Then a section of the wall melted open. A figure stepped out. It wasn't Vorthon. Tall, thin, wrapped in overlapping layers of dark material that seemed alive. It walked to the center of the spire's clearing and looked straight at the drone. Its face was masked, but the eyes black pits with burning gold rings locked. Onto the lens, the drone feed cut instantly. Seconds later, the Defender's internal systems began to glitch. Monitors flashed static. Base's encrypted channels scrambled. Kane's voice cut through the chaos. "Shut down the network." Now Malik's hands flew over the controls. "It's coming from inside the system, Commander." The words stopped. Every screen in the command room went black. Then, one by one, they lit up again, showing the same face, the masked, gold-eyed alien from the spire. It spoke in flawless English. "Your enemy is not who you think." Before anyone could respond, the image vanished. The systems returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Kane said what everyone was thinking. "We've got a leak." She turned to Malik. "Run. Full scans. I want every operative checked. Every every system. If there's someone feeding them information, I want them found before they hand over our throats." Outside the base, the alien fleets, Vorthon and otherwise, continued their slow, deliberate dance in the sky. The galaxy had come to watch, and in the shadows of that gathering, someone, human or otherwise, was making sure the Defenders wouldn't survive what came next. The attack began without a declaration. There was no new voice in the minds of Earth's people, no warning message. 2 governments or armies. The first sign was a change in the sky. The Vorthon fleet, which had hung motionless for days, began to move. In cities across the world, people tilted their heads upward as the great alien discs shifted into attack formation. Ships, the strange, spined, cloud-like visitors from other corners of the galaxy, pulled back to a safe distance. They were not here to fight. They were here to watch. In the Arctic base, alarms blared. Kane stood in the center of the command room, eyes locked on the massive holographic display. The alien ships were closing in on low orbit. A swarm of smaller craft broke away, angling toward the moon. "They're taking out our lunar defenses first," Malik said grimly. "Once that's gone, nothing stands between them and Earth." Kane's voice was steady, but every word carried urgency. "Scramble every combat asset. Launch the Bastion satellites. Get the shield grid online." Operators moved in a blur. In geosynchronous orbit, old but still functional human defense platforms powered up for the first time in decades. Solar arrays unfolded, charging the particle beams. The alien fleet didn't slow. Above the moon, the first battle began. Human defense drones swarmed the incoming Vorthon fighters, spraying them with railgun fire. For a moment, it worked. One alien craft spun out of control, breaking apart in a silent bloom of debris. But the Vorthons adapted instantly. Their ships shifted shape mid-flight, armor rippling to deflect incoming rounds. In seconds, they tore through the drone swarm, cutting the moon's defense grid in half. "Lunar command is gone," an operator reported. "The road to Earth is open." Kane didn't flinch. "Then we make our stand here." From hidden launch sites across the globe, the Defenders' most advanced ships took to the sky. Sleek black-holed interceptors raced toward the upper atmosphere, engines screaming. Behind them, the Bastion satellites locked onto the alien fleet, meant charging for their first volley. In the streets of cities below, ordinary people watched the streaks of light overhead, some cheering, some praying, some too afraid to move. Then, the alien fleet reached the edge of the shield grid. The Bastion satellites fired, beams of pure energy sliced through the darkness, striking the first wave of Vorthon ships. One exploded in a blinding flash, another was torn in half. For the first time since they arrived, the aliens faltered. Cheers erupted in the command room, but the celebration lasted only seconds. The Vorthon capital ship, the largest in orbit, opened its central aperture. From within, a sphere of golden light grew, pulsing with immense energy. When it released, the blast wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense, it was a wave. Every human ship it touched went dead in an instant. Every Bastion satellite shut down. The shield grid collapsed. Kane slammed her fist against the console. "All units engage manually. Keep them away from the surface." High above, human interceptors dove straight into alien formations, weaving through impossible fire. Pilots who'd trained their whole lives for this moment pushed their ships past safe limits, turning the sky into a deadly dance of light and shadow. On the moon's far side, something else stirred. A massive object buried for millennia began to rise, not Vorthon, but older. And it was waking up in the middle of the battle. Back on Earth, David Mbeki stood on his rooftop, laptop bag over his shoulder, watching the chaos in the sky. He could feel the weight of the files he carried, knowing they held something the aliens wanted badly enough to burn the planet for. The wind shifted. A shadow fell over him. He turned and found the needle-shaped ship hovering just above, its crimson lines glowing brighter than ever. This wasn't the war's front line. This was personal, and somewhere deep in orbit, the masked, gold-eyed alien from the spire was watching him through another's eyes, waiting for the right moment to strike. The last stand at Sol had begun. The battle for Sol raged on every front. In low orbit, human interceptors spiraled through burning debris, chasing alien fighters across the fractured shield grid. On the moon's far side, the ancient structure awakened for the first time in thousands of years began to unfold. Its vast metallic petals opening to reveal something hidden at its core. A colossal weapon aimed not at Earth, but at the Vorthon fleet. Kane's voice cut through the chaos in the Arctic base. "Get me a link to that thing now." Kay's fingers flew over the controls. "Commander. It's broadcasting in our old deep space code."
"This thing knows us?"
"Then it's on our side," Kane snapped. "Tell it where to shoot." But before they could transmit, the Vorthons noticed. Their capital ship turned its golden aperture toward the moon, charging for a blast that would tear the ancient weapon apart. In Nairobi, David Mbeki was running. The needle-shaped ship followed him, silent and relentless. He darted through narrow alleys, laptop clutched to his chest. Hearing the faint hum of its engines echo between the walls, The files in his bag weren't just stolen Vorthan tech. Inside was proof, clear, undeniable proof, that the Vorthans hadn't chosen Earth randomly. They had been afraid of it long before they arrived. The crimson ship fired, vaporizing the street behind him. He didn't stop above. The gold-dyed figure from the spire appeared once more on the Defenders' screens. Its voice smooth and calm. The weapon will not fire unless the key is returned. The human carries it. Kane's blood ran cold. The laptop. Get me him, Becky, she barked. Malek's eyes widened. Commander, he's being hunted by... I don't care. Find him. The crimson ship cornered David near the edge of the city, pinning him against the ruins of an old radio tower. The masked alien stepped out of thin air, its form shimmering as though it had simply peeled itself from reality. Give me the key, it said. David's hand shook. And if I don't? The alien tilted its head. Then Earth burns, and no one will ever know why. Before he could answer, the sky above them cracked with thunder. A black-hulled interceptor roared into view, dropping so low its wake rattled the tower. A cable shot down, and David grabbed on without hesitation as the ship shot upward. Kane's voice came through his headset. We've got you, Mbeki. Hold on. Seconds later, the laptop was plugged into the Arctic base's core systems. Ancient moon weapons pedals rotated, locking on to the Vorthan capital ship. Energy gathered at its heart, blue, not gold, cold as starlight. The blast was silent, but its effect was instant. The Vorthan flagship shattered into a billion glittering shards, its shockwave throwing smaller ships into chaos. The alien formation broke, retreat turning into a full rout. From the safety of their distant perches, the watching fleets took note. No one moved to help the Vorthans, not one. In the quiet that followed, Kane spoke over the open channel to whoever was still listening. Earth is not your backwater. We are not your prey. Remember what happened here before you decide to come? Again, in distant star systems, the message was heard and understood. David stood beside Kane in the command room as the alien fleets vanished into the dark. You think they'll stay away? He asked. Kane didn't answer immediately. She watched the moon's ancient weapon fold itself shut, sinking back into the dust as though it had never been there. They'll stay away, she said finally. For a while, but now they know what we're capable of. Outside, the skies cleared for the first time in weeks. Humanity had survived, and the galaxy would never forget the day Earth proved its might.